3 ways to avoid plagiarism, and this is really something you want to take seriously. You do not want to get a black mark on your academic record and potentially be prevented from getting your qualification even at another institution. So that if it's a serious violation, does tend to follow you around. So what are the 3 things you can do to avoid plagiarism? Very, very important. Number 1, make sure you use a proper reference library and manage all the sources, all the works that you've consulted. Just keep track of them somewhere. I teach a course on EndNote. It's in the description. Go check it out. And I would say if you've got to spend the money on a license, do that rather than risk not managing your sources properly. So that includes having a list at the end of your thesis or dissertation or whatever writing deliverable is that you're producing that requires you to cite and manage those sources. And then secondly, always quote if you're using text directly from a source. You shouldn't quote too much. Examiners will be looking for your own interpretation of other people's work, but then it must be your interpretation. It cannot be a direct copy paste from their work into yours. If you have to put the quotation marks if you do that. If you don't put the quotation marks, you have to rephrase, interpret, and add your ideas, add your interpretation. And what I always say in my courses is a good approach is to compare 2 sources, and then the value you're adding is the combination of those 2 sources or the relevant section or aspect of the works that you're looking at. So very importantly, the second tip there is when you bring sources into your work, obviously cite it, and that is taken care of the first tip when you've got a proper EndNote or other reference library. And if you use that, then you should have a little plug-in into your word processor and you can cite as you write, and those citations will then refer to your reference list at the end, but either quote or paraphrase if you bring work in from elsewhere. And then the third important way to avoid plagiarism is use a plagiarism checker. So there's a couple out there. Turnitin is quite effective, but this is really a system where you submit your work and it will scan through it, and it will be able to tell you if you have inadvertently plagiarized from other people's work. And typically there is going to be some level of comparable work just in phrasing and even in the interpretation of other people's work. It'll come through, so it doesn't have to be a 0%. It is conceivable that words can be repeated in exactly the same sequence without intentionally doing that. But I think typically institutions are looking for less than 5% in those plagiarism checkers. So number 1, manage your references properly. Number 2, quote or paraphrase or interpret and add your own ideas with other people's work when you bring it into yours. And thirdly, use a plagiarism checker. And just don't copy. It's not worth it.